The day I awoke from my coma, I recalled three things: my sister's smug expression as she pushed me, my mother's silent gaze from the door, and my father's scrawl on the sheets that would have handed over my inheritance to them. They hoped that a fall of 30 feet would be enough to silence me forever. But here's the thing about survival: there's nothing like brushing with death to give you some clarity. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and here's how I took my family's perfect murder plan and turned it into their perfect nightmare. Sarah Mitchell began with all the ambition of the city she called home, and that was plenty ambitious. Here at the very core of it all, in the midst of New York, where the dreams of millions beat like one restless heart, the temptation was impossible to resist. I was 28, a rising star in investment banking, a fighter with grit and a go-getter. I now resided in a beautiful Upper East Side apartment, the fruits of my labor and my success. But below the veneer of my polished life was a family environment filled with tension, envy, and ultimately betrayal. The Mitchell family were well known on hushed tones in Manhattan. My father, Richard, was a formidable man, the CEO of Mitchell Industries, a business that had been born and raised on the backs of dubious business practices and ethical gray areas alike. High society was my mother, Elizabeth's middle name, a socialite at heart who lived to look good and for the acceptance of others. And there was my younger sister, Emma, the golden child, a mold of everything my family praised. She was the golden daughter, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. The annual charity gala was coming up soon, and I was starting to get nervous. In the bling and sparkle of the event, I tried not to focus on the corruption running through my family's blood. I had discovered a trove of documents that showed my father had engaged in a series of shady deals with the Russian oligarchs: money laundering, bribes, and a cover-up that put our entire family at risk. It was with a heavy heart that this knowledge bore down on my soul. I knew I needed to confront my family. The night of the gala, the elegant setting crowded with the city's most influential. I stood before the audience and adrenaline was rushing through my body. I walked to the microphone with the incriminating documents in my hand. I broke into a sweat as I revealed my father's crimes. The audience's horrified gasps blended with the sound of clinking champagne glasses. Richard looked sallow, and Elizabeth played dumb, her smile city girl gone awry. Emma, who stood next to them, stared at me with an expression of what can only be described as bastardized shock and rage, seeing the surface of our sisterly bond break away. "Sarah, let's not do this here," Emma said, speaking in a low, urgent whisper. Then she pulled me away from the crowd to a rooftop at the hotel, where we saw the city skyline glistening against the night sky. It seemed like this might be an opportunity for us to get to some kind of truth, and maybe for us to repair the rift between us. But as we stood there, wind whipping around us, part of me had a sense of foreboding. Emma's face changed, the slightly concerned look replaced by something darker. Out of nowhere, before I even had time to figure out what she was doing, Emma shoved me. The world tilted and I went down. The city lights smeared into streaks of color as I fell, the seconds stretching out. I fell, and blackness closed in around me. I woke up to the cloying scent of the hospital. My brain was foggy as I tried to remember what had happened. Days turned to weeks as I floated in and out, ensnared in a coma while my family wheeled and dealed a story where I was an unlucky victim of an accidental boon. But I wasn't dead. I was alive, and I could hear the murmurs of the doctors and the nurses, the muted talk of my family. I awoke one day, and months later I came out of the coma, my body useless but my mind keener by far. The physical therapy sessions were cruel with me, as every muscle I exercised reminded me how fragile I had become, but they lit a fire in my belly. I knew that survival wasn't just about waking up. It was reclaiming my life and gaining justice for the betrayal. And as I recuperated, I plotted my revenge. With the help of former employees of my father's company, I amassed evidence of his crimes and made connections with wronged people. I contacted the FBI and gave them my story, as well as the documents that started me on this path of questioning my family in the first place. The more I discovered, the more clearly my path opened up. And a year after my death, I chose to go back to the gala, my family's annual display of how beautiful they are from the outside. I was equal parts nervous and excited as the evening progressed. I was ready. I told my family's story again, and in front of the FBI, accused all of them of their crimes to the stunned crowd. Emma's betrayal was as raw as a new cut, but I held fast, anchored in the truth. When the police swooped to arrest Richard and Emma, I was filled with a feeling of freedom. I saw your too perfect family disintegrate before my eyes, their reputation ruined. I had made my pain my power and gotten myself back in the process. Afterward, I contemplated the road I had traveled from a really low spot to a strong, resilient place. I had made it through that fall they pushed me into, and now it was their turn to go down. I'm not sure why or how, but the skyline didn't feel like a cage, but like a canvas, a blank slate, the next part of the journey ahead, and anything was still possible for me. And my future remained unwritten and had tremendous potential. Magic was in the air on the first night when I found myself amidst the dazzling throng gathered for the yearly Mitchell family pity fundraiser. The opulent ballroom with its crystal chandeliers and silk drapes was the exact opposite of the storm rolling around inside of me. I had been sifting, for weeks, through documents that had uncovered a stunning truth about my family, one that could unravel the elaborate charade we had built our lives upon. Looking around the room, I spotted the kind of polished faces you only find in New York, and let me tell you, this lot didn't disappoint. I could hear laughter and the clink of glasses all around me, but I felt disconnected, as if I were seeing the movie of the evening rather than living it. My father, Richard Mitchell, presided over the middle of the room, his overpowering personal energy attracting people to him like insects to a flame. Elizabeth was fluttering about, her designer dress whirling about her as she welcomed guests with a practiced tone of charm. And there was my sister, Emma, the perfect daughter, spotlight grabber, shine stealer. But I was finished being the dutiful daughter, happy to be the standby resistor while my family held the strings. My finding had roused a fire within me, a desire for justice that outweighed the terror eating at my gut. What I discovered in these papers was my father's dirty dance with Russian oligarchs, and at his own direction, with dirty money. Money he pursued at the expense of his soul and tens of millions of taxpayers' dollars, so to speak, on behalf of the American people. I couldn't let this continue. I needed to face them, to strip away the decades of lies that had enveloped my own family. The weight of the papers in my purse was an accuser, pressing against my side, evidence of my father's treachery lying there like a loaded gun. The time had come. I stood up from my table and my heart pounded until I reached the stage. The gala's MC had just finishing introducing the evening's keynote speaker, and I took a calculated risk, entering the spotlight. "Excuse me." I raised my voice so it was loud enough to be heard over laughter and conversation. Heads swiveled and the crowd fell silent as I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, building up my courage. "I have something important to tell you." The surprise shock on my father's face changed to anger, his beady eyes pinning me in place as he advanced. "Sarah, this isn't the time." But I continued to move on, the stubbornness in me solidifying. "No, Dad, it's exactly the time." I raised the documents, my hands trembling, but I composed myself. Those papers show how my family conducted our business, including financial schemes that stretch back decades, cheating and swindling billions of people in countries all around the world, she said. "This is not just my family's story anymore. This is the story that all these people are facing." Gasps spread through the audience, and I could see the ever so slight look of horror settle on our guests' faces. I was anticipating whispers and murmurs, but the silence was stunned silence. Richard's features went a shade of gray, and Elizabeth's painted smile faltered when she looked at me with a jaw of guppy-esque disbelief and revulsion. "Sarah, you literally have no idea what you're talking about," Emma said in exasperation. "You're just being dramatic." "No, Emma, I'm not making that up," I shot back, my heart pounding. "Just for once, let's not pretend that everything is fine. We are not a happy family. We are a house of cards, and it's time we admitted as much." It was electric in that room, and I felt the weight of the eyes on me, some sympathetic, some judging. Richard came forward and his voice dropped to a growl. "You will regret this, Sarah. You have no idea what you're playing with." But I was driven by a source of strength stronger than fear. I'd been in the shadows too long, not wanting to see what they did to us, what they were doing to our family's legacy out of blind greed and betrayal. "It should be you who's scared, Dad," I said, and a tremor of newfound strength coursed through me. "That's because the truth is going to come out, whether you like it or not." Whispering and muttering filled the room as everyone began talking at once. A few guests started backing away, uncertain what to think. Others fished for their phones, hoping to record the drama playing out at their feet. But I only had eyes for my family and their betrayal, all up in my face bigger than Ballsy's nose. "Let's discuss this somewhere private," Emma pleaded, her voice shaking as she took hold of my arm, her grip forceful and frantic. I paused, torn between wanting to square off against him and the urge to run away from the confrontation I knew was coming. But I also knew I had to face them, to strip away the decades of lies that had enveloped my own family. I started to say something, but Emma dragged me up to the hotel rooftop out of earshot. The night was cool on my sweating skin, and I was grounded, as if doused with cold water all over my body. City lights afar sparkled, definite of the world I was going to conquer. "Sarah, please," I begged as we neared the end of the roof, my voice cracking. "You're making a mistake. That's not the way I fight with family." "Is that what you call it? Family issues?" I shot back, my anger and betrayal growing inside me. "You're okay with letting Dad destroy people's lives in order to salvage our family's reputation." For a brief flicker of a second, I saw something dark cross Emma's face, a glimmer of vulnerability that was as fleeting as it was overshadowed by her infamous smile. "You don't know what's at stake, Sarah. You're risking everything." I had no time to even try and make sense of her words before Emma's expression turned to stone. And it was so quick, from her being at my side one minute, I was lurching toward the edge of the roof, the ground reaching out at me. A bolt of realization struck me, and I had barely a second to scream before I went down, the world spinning into darkness. As I fell, the last thought cramping through my brain was a chilling realization. My sister had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and the family I had fought to defend was willing to destroy me to ensure their perverted birthright. The world smeared and spun as I went down, the night sky overhead changing from inky blackness to a crazy quilt of colors. Time took on this amazing, elastic quality, and I could pick up the pieces of thought and feelings and my sense of disbelief. How had it come to this? How could my own sister do this to me? The last thing I recalled before the jolt was the look in Emma's, the stricken mix of fear and something more sinister, some under-rounded pool of malice I had never wanted to admit. The thud of my body on the pavement was the ultimate period on a life choreographed for the benefit of appearances. My body quivered as I fell into blackness, leaving behind the mob of the gala as a distant rumble, the heavy blackness of sleep covering me like a heavy woolen blanket. When I finally came to, disoriented and aching, I smelled the antiseptic odor of the hospital. I blinked my eyes against the stabbing fluorescent light of the hospital room I was in, the beeping of machines providing a steady beat that was both reassuring and foreign to me. My body felt heavy, the bruises and residual trauma laden upon me, but my head was clear. I was alive, and with that came a spark of hope, an insatiable need to know what had happened. The days became weeks, and so did my comings and goings back to consciousness, my family's faces both bright and hazy. They stood around my hospital bed, concern mixed with something I couldn't quite read on their faces. Richard and Elizabeth had taken the role of the loving parents, their voices gentle and soothing, but there was an edge of strain that I could hear. On the other hand, Emma was away for the majority of my convalescence, and I missed her presence heavily in my pitiful condition. Struggling through the fog of pain and disorientation, I felt memories of that night start to coalesce. My mind was flooded with memories from that gala. My punch, the shocked hush of the crowd, Emma crying and begging me to relent. Every single memory was a knife stabbing me inside, sharp and painful. I spent hours rewinding our argument on the rooftop again and again, wanting answers. Why had she done it? What made her do something that extreme? The physical therapy that came was brutal. Every session, I felt it challenging my stamina and will, and with every step, I could feel something like a smoldering ember within me catch flame. I was no longer a helpless victim. I was a survivor, and I was taking my life back. I could feel the fire in my belly growing every day, a testament to my desires to ascend once more. It was only a matter of time before I began connecting the dots of the evidence I had been accumulating before the fall. My father was not just some figment of my imagination who was doing naughty, naughty things. He was doing them. I started to write down everything I could remember, sifting through it to see if I could use anything as leverage. My father's company empire was based on corruption, and I intended to reveal it. The day I was dismissed from the hospital was a turning point. I opened the door to the high-energy streets of New York, the familiar city sounds enveloping me. But I felt another way, empty and at the same time full. I was their golden child no longer. I was reborn, a woman, and I would not let my sister's betrayal define me. I contacted former employees of Mitchell Industries, victims of the ruthless work practices of my father. They were a little reluctant at first. They were worried about a backlash. But when I told them my story, I could see their eyes opening in understanding. Reported me and I collected, he refers to them as his threads, every statement, to be woven into the fabric of my vengeance. In whispered conversations and late-night sessions in dimly lit cafes, I started piecing together a coalition of people who had been wronged by my family. Their tales had the same commonality as mine. About lies and cheating, the lies and cheating told in the past. It wasn't just me fighting, I knew. There were others willing to fight at my side against the tide of corruption which my own family had been spreading. I started coming up with a plan as the weeks turned into months. I had to accumulate enough evidence to destroy the empire my father had built. I reached out to the FBI, holding forth everything I could remember and providing the documents I'd saved. I got their attention that night, and they seemed incredulous at first, then curious as I explained the tangled web of lies that Richard had woven. There was just one last part of the puzzle I was still missing: evidence of Emma's impact on my fall. I dreaded the idea of seeing my sister in the eye again, but now I knew I had to. I had to make her confess to the depth of the betrayal. That night, I found myself standing on the pavement outside the posh cafe where Emma liked to see her friends. I peered into her window and saw her laughing and talking, carefree in a way that seemed a million miles away from the storm in my own head. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, walking into the heat of the cafe. "Sarah!" she chirped before her smile waned as she saw me. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Can we talk?" I murmured, trying to keep the emotions at bay. "Sure, of course." She directed my attention to a tiny table in the corner, and we sat down and I could feel the tension. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Why did you push me, Emma?" My eyes were on her. I said, "Was it about Dad? Were you looking after him?" Her face changed. The image of the ideal daughter dropped for a moment. "You simply don't get it, Sarah," she started, her voice trembling. "You were threatening everything we've made. I figured if I could just get you to stop. I didn't mean for things to go that far." The confession hovered between us, dense and suffocating. "You tried to kill me, Emma," I said, my voice hardly above a whisper. "All to protect a lie." Her eyes filled with tears, but I found no compassion for her in my heart. I could see it in her face. The fear, the despair, the putrid depths to which she was willing to sink in order to preserve the facade of our perfect family. "I'm going to bring him down, and everything he's done," I insisted, my confidence growing in my tone of voice. "You can be with me or against me." Emma's eyes fell, the options pressing upon her. I could see the war waging inside her, behind her eyes. and I couldn't help but wonder if maybe there was still a sliver of loyalty left in her heart. But I also knew I couldn't wait for her to pick. I stormed out of the cafe, and I was a tidy mix of angry and determined. The so-called rooftop epiphany was the start of my transformation, and now, in the streets of New York, I could hear the pulse of the city beating in tune with mine. I wanted to fight, to get back what had been stolen from me, to finally reveal the truth hidden beneath drugs and abuse. I awoke from the dark of my coma feeling as if I had spent a year in the company of the trees. The hard, cold, fluorescent lights penetrated my eyelids, and as I squinted against their brightness, reality hit me like a tidal wave. I was in a hospital room, the smell of antiseptics sharp in my nostrils, mixing with the faint sound of machines that beeped steadily all around me. It took a second for my cobwebs to clear and for the situation to register. But when it did, the memories came flooding back. The gala, the fight, the betrayal, and an adrenaline surge went through me. I was alive. When I attempted to sit up, a searing pain ran up my body, bringing back parallel memories of the fall that nearly cost me my life. I felt heavy, like I was trying to walk through water, and I realized that I was not only physically weakened, but also emotionally susceptible. The truth and weight of what occurred started to settle, and a wave of anger welled up in me. My sister Emma had thrown me off that rooftop, and the betrayal hurt more than any physical pain. Time rolled by in agony and daze. My parents came to see me, disguised as the concerned, but lurking behind their eyes, I could see the fear. They sought to continue the facade of the perfect family, but I wasn't fooled their lies anymore. My mother, Elizabeth, beside me, speaking with a calm and easy register in her voice, but with an undercurrent of someone who was desperate to hold everything in place. Richard, my father, was different. He was tight, his jaw rigid up at me as if I would spit the truth that hung between us already. The ladies of the hospital and other staff would come in and out, their voices blurred by my concentration on getting well again. I was wheeled to physical therapy every day and threatened within an inch of my life by therapists who persuaded me to muster strength. The first time I tried to stand, my legs collapsed under me and I collapsed on the floor. I felt the frustration rising up. I struggled to hold back the tears that wanted to come out. I was determined to get back up, to get back in control of my body and my life, but my body felt like I was with a new partner I didn't recognize. Weak, uncooperative. The pain was initially agonizing, but as my therapy continued, it turned into a type of purge. Each tiny victory, the first time I took a step, the first time I stood on my own, was a reassurance that I somehow, unbelievably, survived the fall. I learned to bear through its discomfort, to lean into the pain as a step towards my healing. Each session, I felt the flames of my resolve ignite within me, and I wouldn't let my family's betrayal become my definition. In the process, I started to make sense of the clutter in my head. I went over in my head everything that had happened between Emma, Richard, and Elizabeth and me in the lead up to my fall. I came to see that my whole life had been about their expectations, what they wanted, and their definition of success. But then I was taking my identity back. I was not only the golden child, I was Sarah Mitchell, a woman accorded a death and come back with a kind of crazed clarity. The emotional scars were harder to deal with. I'd always been tough, but my sister's betrayal was a wound that would never close. I started to find comfort in therapy, where I could unravel the layers of anger, grief, and confusion that shrouded me. Each session was another step toward understanding, a means of confronting the hurt without being swallowed by it. I learned to express emotion, to accept that my anger was legitimate and that I was entitled to seek recourse for what had been done to me. From that day on, I felt stronger and stronger not only physically, but also mentally. I began to plan the future, plot my next moves. So I was no longer going to be a bystander in my own life. I was going to fight back. I started to collect the evidence of the fact that my father was involved in illegal business, and I got in touch with the former employees whom Mitchell Industry had violated. At first, they were skeptical of the implications, but my story endeared to them. They had glimpsed behind the glistening veneer of our family name, and little by little, I found allies. My recovery turned the corner the day they let me out of the hospital at last. When I emerged out into the busy New York streets, the living din washed over me like a wave. I took a deep breath, appreciating the freedom of the outdoors and of still being alive. The shoulder burden of the past seemed to lift to an extent and be replaced with the reality of having a job to do. The city was a body, and I was poised to take my body back. I returned home, my apartment and sanctuary, with a resolve. The walls that had buzzed with the ring of laughter now whispered of my past, and also of my future. I sat down to write down my thoughts, my feelings, my experiences, and what I intended to do to get back. In fact, I felt relief in putting pen to paper. I was able to transform anger into something beneficial. Haunted by what I had survived, as I rebuilt my life, I began to share the evidence I had collected with the FBI. Every phone call brought me one step closer to holding my family responsible for what they had done. With each conversation, each meeting, I felt an increasing sense of strength. I was no longer Sarah Mitchell, the golden child. I was a woman seething with the rage she had caused, a woman in search of justice. The change was tough, but we needed to do it. I had touched my own mortality and come back stronger, more determined, and prepared to face the family that had betrayed me so savagely. My recovery was to be a reawakening, a rebirth into the path to redemption and self-knowledge. I was no longer identified only as my family's legacy, but as my choices and my steely insistence on telling the truth. Regarding me, I discovered that my survival was only part of the battle. The fall had dropped me into a new universe where I would push back the darkness that had tried to smother me. I was ready for the war to come, ready to conquer the world and write my own story, one step at a time. After I got back on my feet, both physically and figuratively, I knew that survival wasn't going to cut it. I had not trained through the pain of recovery to live in the shadow of my family's betrayal. And I'd suffered the fall, the painful months, and the betrayal my sister's behavior caused just to let them win. Number I was alive, and that could mean only one thing. I was going to make them pay. Step one was easy. Gather every crumb of evidence I could find. My father's shady back and forth with Russian oligarchs, the money laundering, the shell companies, the games he played to hide millions. It was all there, waiting to be uncovered. I began with the papers I'd found prior to the gala, the papers that had precipitated my rooftop confrontation. They remained on my laptop, unviewed since that evening. As I scrolled through them, the rage rose up inside me, but I pushed it down. Rage wouldn't help me now. I had to do things in an ordered way, strategic. It wasn't losing control that had driven them to seek revenge. It was taking it back. I began calling people once employed by Mitchell Industries who had left under mysterious circumstances. It wasn't especially difficult to find them. My father had left quite a bit of destruction behind him. At first, most of them were skeptical. Who wouldn't be? To speak out against Richard Mitchell was a virtual death sentence, at least a guarantee of financial ruin. But once they heard my story, heard how my own father and sister had unsuccessfully worked to silence me, something changed. To them, I was more than just another whistleblower. I was proof that Richard Mitchell's depravity ran deeper than they knew. Gradually, they learned to trust me, and bit by bit, their stories constructed a damning case against my father. The FBI was my next step. This was no longer a family matter. It was criminal. I arranged to meet an agent a family friend recommended to me from among one of my father's former employees. Then I laid it all out for him. Documents, names of shell companies, the whistleblower's testimonies, sitting across from him in the cold, sterile room. "That's enough to take him down," I responded, my voice firm but laced with determination. There was a beat as the agent considered me before nodding. "We will look into it," he said. And for the first time, I felt the edifice of my father's authority begin to crumble. But I wasn't done yet. My father and sister were master manipulators, and I knew they'd attempt to spin any accusations against them. I had to tear down the image they had so carefully constructed. The ideal family, the philanthropic business tycoon, the golden girl. Their shield was the public's perception of them, and I was going to break it down. The Mitchell Charity Gala was once more approaching, and it had been exactly a year since my downfall. It was the perfect stage. I started seeding the media with doubts, anonymously leaking whiffs of corruption and scandal to reporters who had harbored deep suspicions of my father for years. Later, headlines speculating on Mitchell Industries' dirty deeds appeared, and rumors of an investigation by were in the air. My father's meticulously crafted lie empire was starting to show cracks, and I could see the panic in his public appearances. He smiled for the cameras, and yet his eyes gave him away. He knew something was coming. And then there was Emma. I could never forget what she had done to me. The way she'd tossed me off that roof without a second thought. I knew she was just as guilty as my father. The more I excavated, the more I realized she wasn't simply a fellow accomplice in the family's crimes. She had her own skeleton stashed away. Shady charities where the bulk of the money disappears offshore. Stolen funds and behind closed-door deals in order to protect her place in the family business. It was all there, just waiting to be revealed. If my father was the king of our dirty kingdom, she was its royal princess who learned very young that it wasn't never too late to change your fate. I decided to bait her. I had messaged her something enigmatic, meant to rattle her. "We need to talk. Meet me at the coffee shop where it began." I knew she would get the reference. It was where we went when we were children, when I still believed that she was my ally, my sister, my blood. She turned up, as of course she would, her perfect mask still in position, but I was aware the faults were starting. "What do you want, Sarah?" she demanded, her voice biting but tinged with dread. "I just want to know the truth," I said, my eyes locked on her. "You threw me off that roof, Emma. And for what? To protect Dad? To protect yourself?" Her laugh was hollow, bitter. "You don't know what this family does," she said. "You've always been so naive. You fancy yourself a hero, but really you're just a loose end, Sarah. That's all you've ever been." I leaned in closer, my voice lower. "And now I'm the loose end that's going to unstitch everything. I've already gone to the FBI. Everything I need to take down Dad. And you? You're next?" I saw fear in her eyes for the first time. She was beginning to understand that I wasn't that Sarah she'd tossed off that roof. I was stronger now, and I wasn't afraid of her. Or of our father. The night of the gala came, and with it, the realization of everything I had worked so hard for. The ballroom was crowded as it was a year before, the city's upper crust assembled in one place to raise their glasses again to the Mitchell family's good fortune. I was standing by, at the head of the room, watching my father schmooze the place up as well as he always did. Emma was beside him, all Mrs. Sterling. But they didn't see me. Not yet. And when it was my father's turn to speak, I got up and I pushed through the crowd. "Sorry," I said, my voice clear and loud. The room went quiet and everyone turned to face me. My father stopped short, his smile wavering. Emma's face went pale. "This gala is a celebration of lies," I added, waving a folder of papers. "My father has been laundering money, bribing politicians, and extortioning the very people he helped. And my sister? She's just as guilty." Murmurs of shock swept through the crowd as I presented the folder to the FBI agents who had been waiting in the wings. The agents advanced, their badges catching glints from the chandeliers, and the room descended into chaos. My father and Emma were handcuffed and escorted away, their objections drowned out by the murmurs and stares of the shocked onlookers. And I stood there, looking at the empire that they had all created coming crashing down around them. And I felt a weight lift off my chest. I made it through the drop they tossed me over, and now they themselves were being dropped into the abyss. And revenge wasn't just about getting justice. It was about taking back my life, my power, and my truth. And as I left that ballroom, I knew I had. In a black swathe of night outside the plush venue of the annual Mitchell Charity Gala, the air was charged with a familiar sound, laughter, clinking glasses, drifting onto the road. It'd been a year since I'd been thrown off that rooftop, a year to the date my life had trembled in the balance. But tonight I wasn't going to watch. I was the storm that was going to rip apart my family's edifice of calm, my family's pretense. When I walked into the grand ballroom, the showy chandeliers sent back and forth the light that danced along polished marble floors and out among the people. All around me, people were in tuxedos and ballroom gowns, laughing and talking, and all I could think was, Rip was in there and I was going to lose him. My heart raced, not in fear, but in pure anticipation of what was going to happen. This was it, my opportunity to shed the truth and get my life back. And from across the room, I saw my father, Richard, holding court with a ring of alpha-type investors. He was dapper in his sharp suit and had an infectious smile. But I could see past the facade. I could feel the stress behind a flawless front. For decades, he had fabricated his empire of lies, and tonight it would crumble to the ground. Emma was at his side with her practiced perfect expression on, but I could register the flicker of nervousness in her eyes. She had no idea what she was in for. Every step I made towards them, I felt heavier and heavier with the resolve of my decision. This was not just about revenge, it was about justice and my voice. As the night went along, I quieted down and made sure everything was set. The FBI agents were all around the room waiting for my signal. I had overprocessed getting to this point, worked around the clock to make sure I set this one up perfectly, and now it was time to lay it all out on the line. From the stage, the MC demanded silence, and the thing everyone had been waiting for was about to happen, the keynote address by Richard Mitchell. He marched to the stage with that arrogant smile on his face, the only quiet in the room. All right, thank you guys all for coming tonight. He began, his voice cool and commanding. Your backing allows us to carry on in our mission of philanthropy and excellence. A wave of sickness came over me as he told lies. I watched the guests eating his words like candy, without any conception of the darkness which lay behind that facade. It was time to puncture that delusion. Purposefully, I made my way to the front of the room, cutting him off in mid-sentence. Sorry, Dad, I said, my voice slicing through the stillness of the night. There was a collective gasp from the crowd as heads whipped toward me, shock and confusion marring their facial expressions. Sarah, what are you doing? I heard Richard's voice, surly with irritation, but saw the bead of anger in his eyes. I am telling the truth, I said, my heart pattering but my voice clear. You have hidden behind your money and your power for too long, but we are putting an end to that. Tonight, the masks will come down, and the world will see who you truly are. Before he could say anything, I shook this damn folder I had put together over the last year. These documents show that your business is entangled with Russian oligarchs, that your finances and business are compromised, and that you and your crooked family are an illegitimate enterprise, boasted a hacker named Fujimori the following day. You believe you can conceal this forever, but I'm here to light up your dark. The room became suddenly loud with whispers and scattered gasps. Richard's face was mottled with red, and I could see Emma go from a shocked expression to one of betrayal. You'll regret this, Sarah. Richard spit low and dangerously. You don't know what you're doing. But I marched ahead, carried by the flame of my conviction. You're going to threaten me? You threw me off that rooftop and I survived. I'm not scared of you anymore. I nodded at the FBI agents who were traversing the crowd, badges flashing in the lights. They are here to look into your crimes, and no matter what you do, they will not stop. As the agents neared and prepared to pounce, the room erupted into a hotbed of nervous energy. Richard's expression twisted in fury as it dawned on him that I'd planned this so carefully. He looked at Emma with desperation on his face. You need to help me, Emma. We can fix this. But I could see the skepticism in her face. The unfaithfulness she visited on me, it was returning to her. What have you done, Sarah? She said in a shaky voice. You've ruined everything. No, Emma. You fucked everything up when you decided that being loyal to a rotten system was more important than family. I shot back, feeling sadness and anger at once. I've run out of patience being the scapegoat. I'm done being your pawn. The FBI agents closed in and they started picking up the evidence I had led them to and showed it to the Richard and Emma, who were now trapped. The room was tense, the air thick with expectation as the agent started to recite the charges. Richard caved in on himself, and I could see the light of realization flicker in those eyes. His kingdom fell, and with it, his constructed world. "Oh, Sarah, please," Richard begged, desperation creeping into his voice. "We can work this out. You don't have to do this." But I shook my head, and as I did, truth washed over me in a wave of lightness. "No more deals, Dad. No more lies. You'll get what's coming to you." Gasps and whispers filled the air as the agents handcuffed Richard and Emma, and the surreal scenes surrounding them became real. My heart was pounding as I watched them being led away, their power taken from them with just a snap. I had flipped the script, and that family that had turned their backs on me all saw who they really were. Surrounded by the speechless partygoers, I was standing in the middle of the room, and tears welled into my eyes. Relief, anger, resolve, and all that mixing together. I took back my voice, my power, my truth. The consequences of this night would reverberate through the city, but I was prepared for whatever I would face. I had realized then that taking vengeance wasn't really all about satisfaction of seeing my family being brought to justice. It was about transforming myself. I had fallen in the hole that they had dug for me, and now, dust settling around me, I was ready to stand back up, bigger, better, and stronger. As the crowd now dispersed slowly in the aftermath, I sucked in a deep breath of air. I was no longer the Mitchell I was. The Mitchell by name and name only. I was no longer who I am. The betrayal my family exacted on me would not longer define me. That was me, Sarah Mitchell, the woman who slayed her demons. And as I walked out into the brisk night air, I realized that this was only the beginning of everything. A chance at limitless potential. Freedom and a future that I would be able to define on my own terms. What happened after that momentous night at the gala was a storm, whirling around my life and the lives of the people I had once called family. I thought that I longed for the truth to set me free, but the truth was so much more complicated than that. Once Richard and Emma were escorted off in handcuffs, their betrayal was like a punch in my gut, and the pain that had driven me toward this moment came flooding back as if it hadn't ever left. Those weeks after were a media firestorm. The Mitchell family's fall from grace was a national obsession. The headlines flashed across the tabloids, and journalists reeled off the corruption that had been concealed behind our name for so long. I saw my father's empire being torn down, the proud CEO of Mitchell Industries transformed from a hero to a cautionary tale of avarice and betrayal. The world I had known, a world of luxury and elitism, was crumbling around me, and I was both elated and deeply conflicted. When the dust cleared, I was left with a rubble of emotion. I had wanted vengeance, and in so many ways, I had gotten it. The victory was bittersweet, however. The family I resisted had been destroyed, and that loss hurt my heart deeply. All my life, I persecuted myself trying to be like them, and so the mold was broken, and there I was face to face with being myself and being alone. In the middle of all this, I worked on reassembling my own life. I went back to my profession, but the terrain had changed. All of my peers had had it with the scandal. Although some went out of their way to be supportive, some looked at me suspiciously. The murmurs followed me like specters, but I would not let them overtake me. I was not only the golden child, I was a survivor, a woman who had been as close to the brink of betrayal as any woman could go and had a strength I'd never imagined possible. I turned to therapy, where I began to peel away layers of grief and the anger that had piled over my years. Every session was a stepping stone towards healing, towards confronting the emotional wounds left behind by my family's betrayal. I had to learn to express myself and to channel my feelings, not to deny them or to dwell on the pain. The therapist gave me the go-ahead to reinvent myself, to shed myself of the Mitchell name if I needed, and to just be my own person. Along the way, I even drew strength from the connections I made with people who had been harmed by my father's business dealings, as I too was making room for this next chapter in my life. I joined the fight for justice for the victims of corporate injustice, speaking out for the countless individuals who had fallen prey to corporate abuse. I established support groups, protested for change, and told my story in the hope of encouraging others to take their stories back. Eventually, I also learned to forgive, not for my father or Emma, but for myself. I understood that if I continued to cling to the anger, I would remain tied to the past. Forgiveness was not to check or excuse them. It was to release from my own burden of contempt. I started to think of Emma not as my sister, but as a byproduct of our toxic family dynamic. Just another vulnerable player in a twisted game of manipulation and fear. It sucked, but in a way, it gave me a sex on the scale of which I had not felt in years. And so the day arrived that court argued the case against Richard and Emma, sitting in the courtroom, heart pounding, ready to see them one last time. There was an energy, and the room was thick with tension. Richard was as vain as ever, and was fully aware of the implications of his actions. Emma appeared the opposite. He seemed fragile, and he had crushed her confidence. I felt both sorry for and angry at her. This sister who had once been my friend now, but a caricature of herself. As it came my turn to testify, I shuffled to my position in the court, heart pounding. I told them what happened that night. The betrayal, the devastation I suffered, and we all suffered. As I did, I felt the burden of the past lifting. My words coursed forth like a deluge of truth. I was no longer the broken, terrified girl who had been thrown off that roof. I was a woman coming back into my own story, and my voice rang through the quiet in that courtroom. I breathed a sigh of relief as the judge read the decision. Richard and Emma were convicted on several counts, and I started to feel a little closure. Their punishment was a long overdue piece of justice served, but it was also a bittersweet reminder of the family bonds that were now irretrievably shattered. I left the courtroom, the heaviness of their betrayal crushing my heart. But there was also a glimmer of hope, a conviction that I could someday make a life separate from theirs. In the months that followed, I continued to chart my own course. I channeled my energy into work, projects that excited me. I surrounded myself with a different group of friends who supported me and showed me the way. Instead, I learned to enjoy my independence, to find happiness in simple things, and to appreciate the freedom that leaving my past had brought. One evening, standing on the balcony of my apartment looking out at the New York cityscape, I thought about the road that I had traveled. What had been a prison of a city now felt full of possibilities. I was no longer simply an extension of my family's legacy. I was building one of my own. I had survived the fall they'd thrown me into, and in that fight, I discovered my voice. I had turned my pain into purpose and now knew that true strength is internal. The betrayal by my family had made me, but it would not define my future. I was ready for whatever was to come and confident I could steer my life in any direction I pleased. I breathed in and let the peace of the moment wash over me, knowing that I was about to enter the world a new woman, a victor, a fighter, and a light for others who might be in the fight of their lives. I still had a ways to go, but I was no longer afraid. I was free. Thank you for coming with me on this trip about survival and justice. If you want to hear more stories of triumph over betrayal, be sure to hit subscribe. And not to forget, do like this video and share it with somebody who needs to be reminded that survival is the best revenge. Leave a comment below and let us know. Have you ever had to overcome family betrayal? Keep in mind, we've already learned the family you make can be thicker than the family made for you. Keep it up and I'll see you in the next video.